Hey everyone, welcome to Richard's Retro. This is the Bible in 2022. This week, before we get started, I just want to let you all know that we're not meeting in person this week. So, in fact, if you are in town, head over to Fireplace Church. We're going to have a guest speaker tonight, and it's going to be awesome. So, hope to see you guys there. However, we will still be having our Skype meeting. Feel free to hop on. That'll start around 7:30. And I'll be able to join closer to 8 to actually discuss the word with you guys this week. So hope to see a few of you in that as well. All right, without further ado, let's get into it. So we left off in Genesis last week with God promising a son to Abram. But then at the very beginning of this week, he takes it into his own hands and decides to have Ishmael through Hagar. And God, promises to bless Ishmael too, because he is Abram's son, but says that he's not, the promised child, or who God's previous blessing will go through. We see Hagar get banished when, or I guess run away when Sarai mistreats her, and she finds God in the desert. And I thought this was interesting. In 16:13, it says, "She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me." And I thought that was cool because she named God, right? It wasn't a name that he called himself. She named him. And I don't know if that's common. I don't remember, actually, if the other names. I know that there are a few that he says, "This is my name." But I don't know if the others were also given or if he announced them. So I'm going to be paying attention to that as we read through it this year. We get the covenant of circumcision. Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed. And Abraham now, his name is changed as part of the covenant with circumcision. So Abraham pleads for Sodom. I thought this was really interesting. He keeps asking, would you save it for 50 people? Would you save it for, 10 or 30, 20, down to 10? And God God says yes every time, but never says, but there aren't that many people there. And so I wonder if Abraham already knew that there weren't that many people there, and they're just starting high to be like, come on, you do this, right? So surely you do that. And it's funny because, he gets down to 10 and God agrees, but God still destroys the city, which means there weren't even 10 righteous people there, which is crazy because, at least in Lot's house, you would have thought there'd be 4. Yeah, and they're the only 4 that are offered, I guess. Technically their sons-in-laws are offered salvation and choose not to take it. And his wife looks back and doesn't make it. So only Lot and his 2 daughters make it. And we see from their time in the mountains that clearly they weren't quite that righteous either. So it's interesting that Abraham carries on in this line of thought. But he says before counting down, will not the judge of all the earth do right? But this is interesting to me because who decides what's right? Isn't God who decides what's right? So if he's decided to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, then that's what's right. And so it's interesting that Abraham's logic of saying, oh, well, if there's 10 righteous people, you have to not destroy it because that's what would be right. I don't think Abraham gets to make that call. So it's kind of interesting that God's willing to have this conversation with him when he's on a completely different level. Let's see. Oh, I thought it was interesting. I talked about this just a second ago. His sons-in-law were offered a chance to escape, and they thought he was joking. Why would anyone think someone was joking about the end of the world, right? A lot has to be so distrusted in this place that when he comes and says, hey, God said he's going to destroy this city, we have to go, they were like, you've had too much to drink. I thought that was just ridiculous that someone would not heed a call that could save their life and that Lot was so ineffective at convincing these people. I thought this was interesting too, right? I mean, he doesn't seem convinced, because in Genesis 19:16 it says, when he hesitated, talking about Lot, the men grasped his hand and the hands of his wife and his 2 daughters and led them to safety. So even Lot is not ready to leave the city. I thought that was crazy, right? He knows this is coming. He's got these 2 angels here that have told him what's happening and that he needs to hurry, and he's hesitating. I would like to believe that if 2 angels showed up and told me I needed to get out of my house, I wouldn't be like, hold on, I gotta, download some movies for the road first. I don't know, but hopefully I would have that sense of urgency. In Genesis 20, we see Abraham meet Abimelech for the first time and lie about Sarah being his sister. We actually, at the end of this week, read about Isaac lying about Rebecca being his sister to Abimelech too. So Abimelech gets the short end of the stick here a few times. But God comes to him in a dream, and I thought that was really interesting, right? Because God is clearly speaking to Abraham, right? He's called Abraham. He's going to bless the world through Abraham, but he's still working in other people, right? And we don't know Abimelech's relationship with God, whether he was sacrificing to him, whether he was trying to be righteous, whether he was, following some sort of moral code. But God comes and speaks with him, and he speaks back, right? Abimelech says, "Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation?" So he calls him Lord, and I just thought that was really cool. That this clear, I mean, it's easy to say now, like, well, who's Abraham's descendant? But here, clearly, someone not in Abraham's line was interacting with God in a similar way that Abraham was. That's very interesting to me, because it doesn't take, being special to interact with God, yet we constantly needed mediators and priests and the Holy Spirit to do that. And so it was just really cool to see that. We finally see Isaac born and the fulfillment of God's promise. We see Hagar and Ishmael sent away. I have a feeling Sarai was just like looking for any reason to get rid of Hagar. And when Ishmael teased Isaac, it was just like, haha, there's my moment. But God looks out for them as well. We see Abraham told to give up his son Isaac. And in this awesome parallel story of what Jesus is going to do on the cross, or, has done on the cross now, was going to do at this time, God is foreshadowing giving up his own son and asking Abraham to do the same thing. And Abraham doesn't hesitate, just like God doesn't hesitate. That's so cool. And Isaac asks, where's the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham says, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And he does, right? He does then, in like literally, but he does metaphorically too, through the fulfillment, or prophetically, I guess, through Christ. This part was interesting to me. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar. How do you think Isaac felt about all this? Do you think he understood what was happening, that he was about to die, possibly? I don't know how if I'd trust my dad if he tied me up and got ready to kill me and was like, oh, just kidding, I'm not going to kill you. Like, I'd have some trust issues for a while. So I wonder if God had to kind of explain that to Isaac. Or if he didn't understand at all what was happening. It doesn't say how old he was here. Old enough to talk, but it's still crazy. Sarah dies. She's buried. Abraham sends his servant to go find a wife for Isaac, and his servant prays very well. I love this. He says, as for me, the Lord has led me on the journey. He sees God moving in his life, right? It's not just oh, he's doing this for Abraham. He's fulfilled this for me, right? He was kind to my master, but for me, he gave me success on this journey. It says when he came to the spring, he prayed, Lord, if you will, right? He's already recognizing that he has to submit to God's will. If you will, please grant success on the journey to which I have come. That's such a great prayer. Like, grant success to the journey on which I have come, if you will. We'll go more in depth about that in our discussion. But I love that prayer, and it's cool to see Abraham's faith rubbing off on his servants, not even his family. And then when Rebecca agrees to go back to Isaac, they bless her. They say, "Our sister, may you increase to thousands upon thousands." And I thought this was interesting. I wonder if that was a common blessing back then, like everybody wants to have a bunch of kids and to grow, or if they were also being prophetic and like, hey, we see that you're going to be special, or we know that Abraham is going to be special, and so you get to be part of that. So, we're blessing you with this. May you increase to thousands upon thousands. Or if that's just, what they said back then, and it just happened to be that she was going to actually do that. We see Abraham die and get buried. We're given a little bit of lineage about Ishmael. And then, Isaac's story begins with Jacob and Esau. And from the very beginning, even in the womb, they're fighting. And then Jacob takes Esau's birthright twice. Well, takes his birthright and his blessing. And it's funny, or I guess interesting, when Jacob takes the blessing, it's his mom that asks him to do that, right? She sees that it's intended for him and wants to work that out. And Jacob asks, what if my father touches me and I would appear to be tricking him, and he would bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing? And his mother said to him, my son, let the curse fall on me. I'd never thought about this before, but I wonder if you can bring curses upon yourself that were intended for the people. That's a weird thought, because I don't know if that's sound, or and if we should watch out to make sure we don't bring curses upon ourselves, or if this is a real thing, or if she was just saying that to convince him. Because I know we've talked a bunch about how blessings and curses are generational, and how once once someone's been blessed, it's hard to curse them, and so you'd curse the children instead. Or in this culture, they would curse the children instead. So it's interesting that she's trying to take a curse for him, and I wonder if that would stand up. And then Esau shows up, right, at the end, after Jacob's already got the blessing, and says, haven't you reserved any blessing for me? And this stood out to me as well, because, he didn't reserve anything for him. But what if it was reversed? What if he had, in fact, blessed Esau? He didn't save anything for Jacob. And that was kind of weird to me. Like, you've got two sons. Bless them both. Give them different blessings. Instead, he gave everything, he thought, to Esau, and was going to leave nothing for Jacob. And ended up giving everything to Jacob and left nothing for Esau, which is just, sounds like bad parenting to me. Yeah. So I thought that was very interesting. Like, it's upsetting a little bit that Esau got nothing, but mostly because that meant Jacob would have gotten nothing. All right. Going into Psalms. So we actually read Psalm 1 this week. And we see, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who meditates on his law day and night? That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season. We talked about this a little bit last year, but I just love this thought of, if we are supposed to be bearing fruit, if we are trees, there is a season for which we actually yield that fruit, but we do that by delighting in the Lord, meditating on his law day and night, which is what we're doing by reading this Bible in a year. And then we just yield it, right? There isn't work, right? It doesn't say they yield fruit by trying really hard to make the fruit, right? They just delight in the Lord and meditate on it, and the fruit comes when it's ready. And so that was really cool to see at the very beginning of Psalms. And then we read Psalm 4. Tremble and do not sin when you are on your beds. Search your hearts and be silent. And that's something I'm trying to do this year, and I want to encourage you guys to as well, is as you go through and read, take a moment, or longer if you haven't, to be silent. It's really hard for me. For those of you that know me, you can see that pretty clearly, but being silent is very hard for me. And so it's something I'm trying to do, right? To actually search my heart, be silent before God, and see how he moves in my life and responds to that action on my part. And then this was really cool. So in Psalm 107, he says, he stilled the storm to a whisper. The waves of the sea were hushed. This blew my mind this week. This is before Jesus. Who is he talking about that had power to still a storm to a whisper and to hush the waves of the sea? Is he just talking about God? You know, I'm not sure, right? And if he is this prophetic? Like, should they have not seen this happen and be like, oh my goodness, David said God was going to do this, and now we see Jesus doing it, 2 and 2 together, right? I mean, I'm pretty sure this psalm is anonymous, and was probably written by the exiles after coming back from Babylon. So this is actually like, not only, this isn't David, but this is still Psalm, like it still would have been well known, and it would have been well known because it was recent, right? The exiles wrote this, and it's very close to Jesus. So it's crazy to me that they saw this coming. They're like, we're going to see God still storms and hush waves, and then it happens. And they miss it. That was interesting. All right. Speaking of Jesus, we're back in Mark. We see the people of Nazareth refuse to believe in him, which is interesting. I get it. He says a prophet is not without honor except in his own town. But I would have thought, like, I mean, my family supports me. I know that not everybody has that luxury. But I would have thought that in his hometown where people knew him and had seen him grow up, they would have maybe seen more things that made them think. They would have had more time. So it's weird to me that all that time, it wasn't obvious to them who Jesus was. And so they'd had, I guess, enough time to get jaded. And it said he could do no miracles there. That was also impressive. Like, his power, or his ability, I guess, to do miracles. I mean, it was clearly from the Father, but still based on the faith of the people there. And that's interesting to me, that he couldn't, overcome their faith, right? He couldn't be faith for them in this instance and couldn't do miracles for them. He sends out the disciples and they preach that people should repent. That's what we should still be doing, right? I mean, that's the whole point of this message, is to turn back to God. No matter what you're doing, no matter where you're at, turn back to God. We see Herod kill John the Baptist, and he offers half of his kingdom to Herodias' daughter. And that was really interesting to me, right? Because it's the same thing that we see Xerxes do to Esther. And I didn't know if this is common to be like, you can have half my kingdom. Was that like kind of like marriage, right? In marriage, we say you have half of what I have. Was he offering to marry her? Is that what was he suggesting, that they get married? Or was this just a common thing to say you can have up to half my kingdom, and it just meant anything, and it wasn't really expected that someone would say, like, if someone said, hey, you could have up to half my kingdom, I'd be like, I will take half of your kingdom, please. It seems like a weird offer, but it's happened multiple times. So I wonder if it was just a phrase. We see Jesus feed 5,000. And I love this, that his response to hearing about John the Baptist's death, in his sorrow, his response is to feed people. And he starts, though, by saying, come with me, he's talking to the disciples, by yourselves, to a quiet place and get some rest. I love this, that he loves going to a quiet place and is offering to, he's inviting us, and as he did the disciples, to go with him to this quiet place. And we should. After leaving them, after he feeds them, he says he went up on a mountainside to pray. Again, I'm going to repeat myself, but the theme continues. We see Jesus step away to take time to pray. We should do that. Just as we should be silent, just as we should be quiet, we should pray. We should take that time, because that's where Jesus recharged. That's where Jesus met with God. That's where he got his instructions, where he got his strength and his direction. And then this was crazy. He walks out on water to be with them, right? We were just talking about this, right? He walks out on water because the wind is against them. And he says, don't be afraid. And he climbed in the boat with them. And they were amazed, but they didn't understand because their hearts were hardened. Why do you think God... I mean, we've talked about this, God hardening Pharaoh's heart and others throughout the Old Testament. Why would he harden the disciples' hearts? Like, was he not ready? Were they not ready? It seems strange to me that their hearts would be hardened. So we'll talk about that this week. Why do you think their hearts were hardened? Jesus teaches us about inner purity, and he kind of corrects the Pharisees. You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to human traditions. We do the same thing, right? We get so caught up in our traditions that we feel like we have to do them, and we're missing what God really wants, the important things. He says, what comes out of a person is what defiles them. For it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come. Sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. This was interesting to me too. Folly is a sin. I thought, folly is being foolish, right? I wonder if it means something else, and it's like intentional folly. But I didn't think being dumb was a sin, and I'm sure I'm misinterpreting that, but it's strange to me that folly is a sin. But Jesus calls it out. He's against it. We see Jesus continue to preach, and we see the woman come and ask to have Jesus, I think, heal her daughters? No, drive a demon out of her daughter. And Jesus says no. He's like, I gotta, feed my children first. I can't take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. And she says, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. And he told her, for such a reply, you may go. The demon has left your daughter. I love this. For such a reply. Our response to God matters. Think about that. Our response matters. He may say things that we think are out of character, right? God healed everyone. They come and say, if you're willing. And he's like, of course I'm willing. I want to heal you. Here, he says no, which is weird, right? I would not have expected that. And he says no in kind of a rude way, like, sorry, you're just a dog. I can't feed you. Instead of being upset or offended, she turns around and she's like, come on, even the dogs get fed. And her response, her belief in his ability to meet her needs and willingness to, even with his answer, her response showed her faith and resulted in the healing of her daughter. And that was super exciting to me this week. We see Jesus then feed 4,000. So he's already fed 5,000. Now he feeds 4,000. And the disciples still don't get it. They still struggle to actually feed the people, even after seeing this. And then they run out of bread and are quarreling about it. And it says, do you still not understand? Where are we doing this today? Right? Where are we missing the point? Missing Jesus? Like, Jesus has laid all of this out, and we're still quarreling over food and over silly little things when God can meet all those needs. He also says, why does this generation ask for a sign? No sign will be given to it. That's interesting to me as well, right? Because Jesus is clearly a sign. But I wonder why, if God was willing to give signs in the past through burning bushes and the plagues and many other things, why not give signs to this time? Why not give more signs to our time, right? It's interesting that, maybe it's because he wants to move past signs. We see Peter call Jesus the Messiah, which is awesome. And then couple sentences later, we see Jesus call Peter Satan and say, "Get behind me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." And this is great, right? This is key and something I think I missed for a really long time, that Jesus was doing what God wanted, not what Jesus wanted. And that's what we should be doing. We should be doing what God wants, not what we want or what we think others want. It's easy to say, oh, well, obviously if you're going to die in this place, don't go to that place. But if God's calling you to go there, even if it's high risk, we should not have in mind human concerns. We should have in mind the concerns of God. And that's, it's crazy because it goes completely against everything we think. But that's what Jesus did. And if he's going to be our example, it's what we should do. We see Jesus transfigured on the mountain. And as they were coming down, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they'd seen. And he says, don't tell anyone what you've seen until the Son of Man has risen from the dead. And they kept the matter to themselves, discussing what rising from the dead meant. I think it means rising from the dead. Like, how did they miss this? They do it again, actually, shortly after. Where is it? I didn't highlight it. But another time in this week's reading, Jesus predicts his death a second time. And they're like, he actually does it a third time this week. But after the second time, they're like, what does he mean he's going to die? Well, he means he's going to die. Like, and it's interesting that I don't think he could be any clearer here. Like, this isn't a parable. He's like, I'm going to die, and then I'm going to rise from the dead. And they're like, wait, what does that mean? It's also really cool seeing the transfiguration because you had Moses and Elijah there, and Moses clearly represents the law, and I'm pretty sure Elijah represents the prophets, and Jesus showing up kind of fulfills both of them, and I thought that was really cool just to see them all together, right? We see Jesus praying for this boy this father of this boy who has a spirit that the disciples can't cast out. He says, everything is possible for one who believes. And he says, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. So he's like, I believe, but if there's a little bit in there, could you help? And he does, right? So it's weird, again, to see, previously where he couldn't heal because of their unbelief. And here this man wants to believe, and that's apparently enough. And I love Jesus' prayer over the boy. He says, come out of him and never enter him again, right? He adds that very crucial piece of information. Don't come back. I think that's important when we pray for people. Okay, in Mark 9:42, it says, Jesus says, if anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them if a large millstone were hung around their neck and they were thrown into the sea. I would love to do a Greek check on the word little ones, because Christians means little Christ. And I wonder if when he said little ones, he meant, the people being like me, or if little ones really is like a direct Greek translation for children, right? Is he talking about children, or is he talking about all believers that are like him? We see Jesus bless children. I mean, he clearly does care about children. We see the Pharisees ask about divorce. And I thought this was interesting because Jesus kind of turns it on them and says, God intended for you not to divorce. But Jesus, he clearly gave God's ideal for marriage from the Genesis story. But he doesn't overturn Moses' teaching, right? He doesn't contradict the law. He still says, Moses said you could divorce, you can divorce. But that's not God's plan. And I thought that was interesting, right? Because he says clearly if you divorce, it's committing adultery, but and you're in sin. But he doesn't say don't do it. He just says God's ideal is for you to be one flesh. That was God's plan. And I thought that was interesting. Instead of like answering with law, he answers with relationship. This is what God wants. We see the rich young man who says, I've done all of these things, right? I've kept the law. I've loved people. And he says, Jesus looked at him and loved him. And I love that Jesus has compassion on this man that he knows is not going to answer the next question correctly. And he says, one thing you lack. Go sell everything you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me. And he can't. He goes away sad. And that's hard for us, especially in today's society where we put so much value on gathering wealth. I mean, I guess everyone did throughout time. That's not unique to us, but it's hard to give up the things we think we've accomplished to follow God. But when he calls us to, we have to be ready. And even if it's not giving up, literally selling everything we have, if he asks us to give up things, we should be willing to follow him. Then we see Jesus predict his death a third time, and his disciples quarreling about who should be first. He says the Son of Man didn't come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So again, just a reminder that we should be serving each other rather than looking to be served. And then we see Jesus heal the blind beggar. This is great because this guy just keeps yelling. And everyone's like, be quiet. You're just annoying. And he just yells louder and louder until Jesus, he's persistent, just like Jesus said. And you should be. And so Jesus, he has him come and says, what do you want me to do for you? I love this, right? Here we have Jesus, who can do anything effectively. And he's staring in front of a blind man and says, what do you want? Like, what do you think a blind man wants? And he answers as we would suspect. I want to see. And Jesus heals him. But this is crazy. Like, I wonder if Jesus was inviting him to ask for something even better, right? I want salvation. I want to be free of my sin, right? Which is, he's offering so much more than just earthly sight. But I love that he lets this man answer, what do you want? What can I do? What do you want me to do for you? We'll talk about that in our meeting. It's awesome because I think he's saying that to all of us, right? He can do vastly more than we could possibly imagine, but he wants to know what we want, right? How can he heal us? How can he remove the sin from your life and make you whole, right? He's willing and waiting for us to have faith in him and to believe in him so that he can complete it. All right. That was this week's reading. Hopefully you had a chance to go through it yourself, but if not, hopefully those are some fun talking points to go over this week. Again, there'll be no in-person meeting, but I do look forward to seeing you all on the Skype call tonight to chat about this. So I'll see you there. Cheers.